friends and familiars. This is Matt Orozco here from Macabre Daily, and I'm super excited today to be joined by Brian Klewin. Am I saying your last name right, Brian, by the way? Is it Klewin or is my
It's
should I
Klewin is
Klewin?
the preferred pronunciation.
Yeah, I should have asked you before I hit the record button, but you know
It's all
what? This
good.
is this we make mistakes, we live up to them. So Brian Klewin, thank you so much for taking some time to speak to me today. And you are the writer, director, and editor of Bloodsuckers and the Grimoire, which is going to be out exclusively on Screambox as well as a handful of other PVOD services on October 21st. So Brian, pleasure to have you with me today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. Excited to be
Oh,
here. Talk a little bit about the movie and myself as a filmmaker, and maybe some cool stuff about comics, toys, anime, you name it.
awesome. Hey, well, listen, we'll have plenty to talk about then. I can just already tell by your background that you are a kindred spirit in terms of your love of genre and horror and all things awesome. So, I am not in my normal abode, but nevertheless, sure we could pretty talk about collectibles all day. But I want to ask you a little bit before we get into the film about yourself. You know, what is your journey to horror? What does that origin story look like for you as far as your first experience with genre and then eventually taking that love of it and parlaying it into filmmaking?
Yeah, sure. My name is Brian Klewin, and I'm the writer, director, editor, and the VFX artist for Bloodsuckers and the Grimoire. I also function as one of the producers on the movie. It was my first feature film, so it was very exciting to make it in my home state of Wisconsin, which is where I'm from. I'm a Midwest boy, and that I think translates into this movie. When you see it, there's a lot of love for the Midwest in this. We shot part of it in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then part of it in Warrens, Wisconsin. And I think if you're talking about my origin story, it's starts as a young child. My mom took me to see The People Under the Stairs when I was 6 years old, which was probably a very inappropriate age to see that movie.
But
But
it
it
made you the
was
person you are now, so it's one of those things
right.
hard to regret it, you know?
Yeah, no regrets for sure. Uh, and that movie now, when I watch it as an adult, is not very scary, but I was terrified as a child.
Oh, for
And
sure.
but it's like it when you feel comfortable watching those movies and you walk out of them and you survive, it opens that door pretty early on if you to seeing more things like that. And I was also obsessed with Spielberg movies, and he had tucked a lot of weird scenes in a lot of his films that were kind of terrifying as a kid. The Goonies, which is, I mean, it's a Richard Donner film, but a Spielberg story. And there's a lot of
Raiders
really
Lost
scary.
Ark. I mean,
Raiders
the
has a
ending
lot of,
of Raiders
yeah,
is gross.
yeah, just the faces melting, like there's some great stuff in there, and that's like the gateway, I think, as a kid, is just seeing that stuff and feeling comfortable afterwards and going, man, that was terrifying, but also I survived, and I feel like now I can go out into the world and do the things that I need to do. So, and that was really important for me because I had a lot of trauma as a kid. I lost my sister. She was killed when I was 7. And those the film was the place where I would just go to isolate and find worlds that kind of took me away from the real world. So all the movies that I love are things that are probably not, you know, things that could be actually in the real world. Things that are a little more fantasy heavy, supernatural heavy, and that's why I gravitated to all the like the Amblin stuff and horror and obviously I was a huge Star Wars fan as a kid. Those just they just ripped me away from the reality of my actual daily life, and I needed that as a kid. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you've touched on something that it's become a recurring theme with not just the interviews we do like these with filmmakers like yourselves, but also just the conversations we have amongst our peers, which is that so many people arrive at horror movies and genre at large because they felt like they were othered in some way or they had something happen to them that caused them to retreat. And they found so much comfort in other places because, you know, Star Wars is a great example of like a world where there is a clear sense of good and evil. And there's no debate, you know, there's no ambiguity like we have in our actual world. So it's so easy to want to be in that place because you know that like the rights are wrong or the wrongs are righted there, whereas in the real world, it couldn't be farther from the truth.
Yeah, and I do. There is something to be said about it's a happy ending or a movie that resolves with some sort of like uh, something that is positive, and that usually involves something where like the good triumphs over evil, and I still appreciate a movie like that today. So I wish more people would make those types of movies again that don't just end on a sad note. But I can appreciate those movies as well. So
You know, it's really funny you say that because I just saw Queens of the Dead last night, which is the new Tina Romero movie. It's kind of like drag queen zombies, and
cool.
it has a really like I don't want to say a positive ending, but the ending is like upbeat. It doesn't end on this dour, bleak note like so many horror movies do, and it was really refreshing because there is a lot of good emotion kind of interwoven throughout the film itself. And I think that there is something to that Amblin-like experience of getting some positive closure at the end, where like the world is, if it's not a better place by the end of those movies, it's at least back to the way it was before. And I
Yeah.
think our worlds are constantly changing and shifting in, in our lived experiences. And we don't have that kind of control to be able to place ourselves in that positive moment. So I do think so much of as much as I do love the bleak transgressiveness of horror, I also do need like I can't overwhelm myself with that because I know that that's just, that's not healthy either. Too much of anything is really not a good thing.
Yeah, and I recently rewatched the whole Conjuring franchise, and I was, those movies are absolutely terrifying while you're watching them, but they all have these like beautiful endings that resolve everything, and you just feel like everybody's kind of wrapped up in a warm blanket and they're safe, and whatever the evil that they had to face, they've overcome it. And I mean, I love that franchise, and I recently saw the Conjuring Last Rites, and it again did that, and I can those are like as far as modern horror goes, some of the best I think that have ever been made. So
I mean, they've not only just financially successful, but they've cultivated an entire universe amongst them. And I think that there's something we don't get that very often, where something establishes a franchise that doesn't just build upon its main characters, but expands into being kind of a bunch of spin-offs. So I think James Wan and the team have really tapped into something unique. And you've done the same with Bloodsuckers and the Grimoire. I mean, you said before kind of your love of fantastic worlds and this merging of horror. I mean, even so much like the pitch for this is Lost Boys meets Evil Dead. So I'm wondering, like, at what point did you arrive at this idea to combine those two elements of fantasy and, horror vampirism into one?
yeah, I think for me, the mashing up of genre and all the things I love just comes from just being like totally immersed in that stuff my whole life. And I realized through the short film process that you're often like, when you make a short, you're kind of stuck with one note. You're telling a very specific story in a very condensed window. And I tried experimenting with like the different filmmakers that I idolized, and at different points I was obsessed with different filmmakers, and I had to be like, okay, who am I as a filmmaker? What are the things that I absolutely watch over and over and over, and what are the things that I'm obsessed with? And that's when I started to be like, okay, The Lost Boys is a it's a horror movie, but it's a comedy. It's like it's got this levity to it, and it's an adventure movie at the end of the day too. I've mentioned Goonies again. I'm wearing my Goonies shirt today. It's like the probably the first movie I was obsessed with growing up, and the Sam Raimi stuff, he's always, even when you're like in something like Drag Me to Hell, which is a much scarier movie than I would say any of the Evil Dead stuff, he's got this levity to it, and you're just like, there's times where you're just like, this is so absurd, and I'm here for all of it. That stuff all mixed together is like, okay, this is if I'm gonna make a movie, I want to make something like this. So I'm starting to stack those ideas together, and then a big part of my life has always been anime. Since I was pretty young, I started with Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, And then I found One Piece when I was in high school, and now I'm going on like almost 25 years of watching One Piece, which is a rare thing, I think, to have
That's
anything
impressive.
that's existed that long even.
Yeah.
And it's just the character Luffy and the way that the character has to like he's constantly finding new things he has to overcome, but he has this very singular goal of becoming the Pirate King. But there's more goals tucked in there because everything to get there has to have these other things accomplished. So with like Bloodsuckers, when I started writing it, I start generally with a theme so that I can figure out all the character, the plot, the story. So for this one, it was probably something like if you don't confront the past, it will feed off you. And that's like, that's a kitschy way of like adding the vampire stuff in there is like but that's exactly what this character was going through. He was somebody who was at the end of his college career, the end of his soccer career, and he also had lost somebody close to him, his dad, in the past. And those things were all just kind of coming to a head, and where he was forced to deal with these things. Otherwise, he was never going to move on with his life and never figure out what his life was supposed to be. So that's like the origin of the movie, and then I'll get into a little bit of how I was like capable of actually making the thing. Was my partner Megan Rebecca? She's like I said, she did the makeup, the hair, the visual effect or the special effects makeup, and
And
she
by the
was
way,
one of the
it all looks
producers.
great. Like just to add, just to chime in, like, I know that oftentimes in filmmakers, especially independent ones, are working within a confines of relatively limited means. And so it's always really impressive to see when a movie doesn't just really go for it, but also does so quite well. So hats off to yourself and Maggie Rebecca for that, because again, it just brings so much to this, especially with the high kind of concepts you have and some of the ideas you're putting out there. It doesn't ever feel like you negotiated as much, or at least, I'm sure you had to, but what we see on the screen doesn't feel like you had to cut any corners.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. So again, like I'll kind of touch on what you were talking about too. So she introduced me to Siddhartha Rajan, who is the lead of the movie. And when I met him, it was one of the only times I've actually, because, sorry, I'll just back up. One Piece is so massive. Obviously, it's 25 years plus of content. There's not a lot of people who have the same obsession with it as I do. They'll love the anime or like want to know more about it. But he was one of the only people I've ever met who's watched all of it and read the manga. He might be a bigger fan as far as that goes. He's
Like a
further
Step
ahead
Brothers
because
moment.
yeah. And we became like instant best friends. And I was just kind of in the outlining phase of it. But when I met him, I was like, dude, I'm writing this movie. What do you think? And he's like, well, that sounds incredible. I'm like, yeah, it's Evil Dead, Lost Boys, but it's like this. It's supposed to be like a live action anime at the end of it. And like, he's like, dude, go write that movie. And then I went and spent the next like month writing the movie, and we went. It was just like a hyper fast timeline because I knew one at the time I was like it was COVID stuff. I don't really want to talk about that era, but I have to because it was part of how this movie got made. I was very down because all of the jobs I had lined up were disappearing, and I was just like, what am I going to do? All the stuff I've been working for is disappearing. And I was like, let's just figure out how to finally make a feature film and actually get it produced. So I wrote this script and we fast tracked the production, and I just found the bare minimum of the most talented people I could find that I knew I had worked with before to get this thing made. So we really only had a crew of 5 people, and that includes myself. So it was myself, Megan, our DP, our location sound, and we had a swing grip slash gaffer. And the 5 of us took the whole movie on. And when you say like it looks really good and it feels really like we didn't have to cut corners, that's partially because of the great talent that we had. But the other part is I had done so much writing that had either been produced as a short film with no money or stuff that I had written that I knew was never going to get produced because it required too much money. So I found the balance in this movie and said, what can we do with very little resources? What do we have available to us? And how do I make that feel like a giant, like a bigger world than would be able to be produced for this no budget type of movie? So I hope we accomplished that. It sounds like you felt like we did some pretty cool stuff. I think we did some really cool stuff. And as a filmmaker, you have to make things like this because you learn so much. I mean,
Totally.
I I now when I've written things since then, and the most recent thing is starting to be taken out to managers and reps so that I can actually start pitching at the studio level. And it recently came back from coverage, the newest script, and for people that don't know what coverage is, it's industry readers read the script that you've written, and then they give it a pass, consider, or a recommend. Recommend being the highest that you can get, and it came back with a recommend, and then in every category it had excellent, which was the highest remarks that you can get. So
Congrats.
thank you. Yeah, it feels like things are kind of all coming together at once for me, and hopefully I'll get to make another movie soon.
I mean, first of all, just again, I hope it's exciting to hear that you're starting to see some traction because I think one of the things that can be so frustrating about being in filmmaking is that it can, like, as you talked about with COVID, like opportunities do just kind of evaporate. Whether it's something that's happening that's beyond control, like a pandemic, or something that just like, the producers skip town or they decide they pull out and all of a sudden there's no money from your main backers. All of these things can go wrong. And so it's nice when we do hear that, there's always going to be adversity, but the ability to overcome it does exist. And I agree with something you said about, having to make movies this way because I think so much of what has made horror one of the most popular genres, like in our current moment, like the current zeitgeist, horror is not just a financial success. It is everyone who even wasn't into horror before is starting to look at it a little bit differently. It's not as faux pas or like taboo to be a fan of anymore.
Right.
But that's because this has grown on the backs of filmmakers who've been making sub, $500,000, sub 100,000, sub 50, sub $10,000 movies and seeing like massive returns on them because they're just full of ideas. They're not perfect. I think Terrifier is the easiest example to use in that it's what happens when you have a really good idea, a pretty good execution, but enough that people just get excited. And I think that that's what horror really is it gets people really excited in a way that, like no one is wearing an English Patient t-shirt. You know what I mean? Like that's
Right.
like I'm sure there's somebody out there who has one, but it's like, the biggest Ralph Fiennes fans out there probably has one. But it's like, people are wearing like a Goonies shirt. We're wearing like Tales from the Crypt shirts and stuff that like hasn't been around or have been relevant for decades. And it's because horror has this propulsiveness to it. And I think filmmakers like yourselves, showing that you can do a lot with very little reminds the industry that, it's not expensive to fund these things, but even a little bit of money can go a long way for making something um, exponentially better than it was, or, just having to work within that scarcity mindset makes you a better filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, limitations breed creativity, in my opinion. So if I had an unlimited pile of money, I might just hit paralysis pretty fast
Right.
because I was like, whoa, I can do whatever I want here. I mean, I generally do say I can do whatever I want, but it always I write with this idea that I'm gonna have to go produce it myself. I have nobody coming to save me. No one's coming with big dollars. So what can I write that I know I can go make if I had the opportunity to the next day or whatever. And that's, I guess, the best advice I could ever give to any other filmmaker is just don't ever worry so much about uh, where the money's coming from or how you're going to find all this money because it's probably never coming. So instead write something you can make with very little money and be as creative as possible and figure out, going back to that theme thing, it's that for me has always been the thing that has given me a North Star when I'm writing. It tells me the character that will best be able to embody the theme of the movie that I want. And then all of the story elements that come after that are generally based on that theme as well. The decisions that that character makes to go from this place of, I call it stasis, where they're just kind of stuck in their normal life, to this place where they've changed and they've overcome a great deal to in by the end of it embody that theme.
And how did
So,
you arrive at your process? Because I think it's like something that, everyone has their own way. I think let me say this differently. I think asking people about process is kind of interesting. It's kind of a bit of a fool's errand because I don't think everyone thinks about it in terms of process. But you've kind of come back to this idea of that your theme ends up becoming this real kind of guiding light for you as you go through the process. So at what point did you realize that that's what you needed in order to be kind of most effective and productive?
well, when you first start off, you're pretty like excited about everything. So you just start writing and you're like, okay, this is shit. Everybody hates this. This is shit. This is shit. And then you either say, okay, I have to start thinking about this stuff. Maybe Quentin Tarantino doesn't have to, but I've even
I'm
heard
sure he
him.
does. I'm sure
Yeah,
he does.
even he probably has to. But at some point, you have to figure out like, well, this is the structure of a normal film. How can I distill that down? And what does that tell me? And there's a lot of great people who have written books and things like that. And now everybody has some sort of podcast you can listen to. So there's just so much out there and available that if you're hungry for knowledge, which is what how I've always been, I've just been obsessed with learning, and that part is the doing and then learning in between every time. So that's my big process is that I constantly am trying to find new people to listen to read about, and what ends up happening is if I have an idea and I'm actively learning through that process, it helps with the creativity because I don't ever seem to hit walls. I find just solutions to problems always.
Yeah.
So even when I'm, writing something new right now, I'm outlining something, I'm going back to a book. Uh, it's called Save the Cat, which is one of the most classic at this point pieces that I think anyone can read. And it may be some people might view it as rudimentary, some people might view it as limiting to have somebody telling you about structure and things like that. But if you take away all the nonsense that people say about this stuff, it's a huge help to have something like that, even if you're not using it as a one for one. It's still this like, okay, I can take this bit and it will help me move along in my story, or I can ignore this part. But you're gonna find that you have this much easier path forward when you're learning and you're listening to people who have done this at a great at like with great success and at a high level. So that's like a big part of my process is again just the constantly learning and never resting and saying, okay, well, I've done it once before with some success, maybe this time will be better. That's kind of like a wish and a prayer, and I would rather be like the characters I admire, like Luffy, who is just he is constantly learning from mentors and constantly learning from people who have achieved great things. And I think that's the best way to advance your career and advance your abilities in life is just to learn from the masters of the craft.
Well, because a couple of things you've said that I think are really important to highlight. One of them being is that, having a framework that you operate from reminds you that you don't have to recreate this thing every single time from scratch. Like it allows the creative process to not be stifled by the kind of bureaucracy of creativity, which is like, how do I format this in a way that's palatable at a story level? It's like the Pixar storytelling method is very well known and it's not complicated. It's once upon a time there was that everything was fine until then this thing happened and everything changed and then this resolution occurred and now everyone's better because of it. So like these points, like they're not there to limit you. They're there to guide you so that you're not wasting time on chasing things that aren't going to be relevant to your story or maybe kind of getting caught up on points that you're not there for yet. And the other is learning. I constantly tell our other writers that you should be reading other people's reviews, not so much to inform how your own opinion, but really to inform kind of how people talk about things. Because oftentimes, enjoying film in particular, it wasn't until we had the ubiquity of the internet that we could all engage with each other in this intellectual way about filmmaking and movies. Before it just you hoped you had a friend who gave as much of a shit as you did, and not
Hmm.
everyone had that. So now we have this ability to kind of have these discussions, but at the same time, like we don't know it all. And our ability to read what other people think about it and how they perceive something can vastly change not just how we write about it or consider it, but also kind of how we view material going forward. And I think that constant evolution of learning and adapting is so key, not just to filmmaking, but just to anything really, is that the more you learn, the more you're developing, the more you don't have the chance to be left behind. And as you think about, lessons learned on Bloodsuckers and the Grimoire, like what are some things that stood out to you through this process that you're like, okay, this is something that I either I'm going to start doing going forward, or I'm going to stop doing this, or hey, I'm going to keep doing this because it's something that's really working for me.
Well, for sure, the writing process, there were a few scenes that ended up on the cutting room floor that were redundant scenes that we actually went out and filmed. And when you start assembling the movie and you're putting them together, and you're like, okay, what's being said in this scene and what's being said in this scene are very similar, and it's you start showing it to people, and you can tell they're like, well, the pacing, they talk about pacing in the movie. People, when you get opinions on things, or initially when you're starting the process, they will point to places and maybe they have solutions, and you're like, well, I hate that solution, but listen to what they're saying. It's not necessarily the solution, but they're pointing to a problem. So for me, that was a big thing. Is being as lean as possible in the script, and making sure that there aren't these redundant moments, or if you want, you can condense those things into one moment. Um, a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about with theme and stuff like that, I came to after this script. I had written a few scripts, feature film scripts before this, but they were always kind of without process and without understanding, and they never got made. And those one of them I did eventually take out for coverage just to see, and it came back as a pass, and just pretty bad reviews. So that was for me. It was like, okay, I have to continue this process of learning, and it's just like after years it starts to stack up, and you find all these things that were missing in the process. And Bloodsuckers was a first time where things were successful, and I learned a lot from the writing process. Another thing is like the directing side of things. I've learned quite a bit about how to direct actors that I didn't have that toolkit when I was on set. I had a toolkit that was able to get me to the point where I was able to make this feature, and I'm happy with the results. But now I can communicate with actors in a much more actor friendly way, using things like actions, rather than just saying, I want you to feel like this, or it should feel like this. Those are things that like actors don't really respond to. And I had to learn some of that on set, because I had some actors who had probably more experience acting than I had directing actors. So they taught me some things on set, but it all connected through my learning process afterwards, where I was like, okay, let me read more books about directing. Let me listen to more people talking about directing. And that helped me a lot with learning how to communicate with actors and things like that. So those things are the things that I'll be taking into the next project. And I've a lot of what I'm talking about with the directing now ends up on the page when I'm writing, where I say specific things instead of like they cry or something like that. It's more like, well, people don't just cry, they're usually trying to not cry. So,
Right.
I'll write they fight tears or something like that. So it's a much more actionable thing for an actor to do. And like I'm able to understand the relationship between these two people on screen rather than just the one person who's trying to live this emotion that I have in my head. It's what's the action that can actually get them to convey that emotion without saying, you feel sad here, you feel
Yeah.
happy here, you know? So, and
You need motivation, right? Like there's all that
right,
comes down like what's my motivation for being sad
right,
or
right.
angry?
That's a very cliche thing, and it doesn't click if you don't understand what they're actually saying there. What is my motivation? Can you're like, okay, what is that? Does that mean the backstory? What does that exactly mean? But now I have a much better understanding of it's the relationship between these two characters and what does one character want from another character and what is the best what is the way that they're trying to execute that thing. And those are things that I'll be taking, like I said, into the next project. And I put them on the page now, a lot of this stuff. And I just I think just knowing that I always want to be getting better at something. That's another thing from this movie that I learned is just, okay, the next one, I want it to, when people see the next one, I don't want them to just be like, oh, it has a bigger budget, so therefore it's better. I want people to be like, everything about this is better. The story's better. The acting is better. The directing is better. The cinematography is better. So how do I how do I make sure that happens? And that's like again going back to the process of learning in between all these projects. So I have a much more robust toolkit for every part of the process now because I was fortunate enough to get to make a feature film like Bloodsuckers and the Grimoire.
I mean, it sounds like you've got the right mindset to just continually elevate your own ability through just the process of naturally being curious and interested. And I think that there's so much to be like, when it comes down to, I do believe there's a thing as talent when it comes to being able to make films and be able to create stories. But I also believe that, you can foster talent, but there are certain things you can't foster in people. They're more intrinsic, something like a desire to learn and grow. Like that's not something you can make someone do. And it shows in the work. I think that you can be a fine filmmaker that just kind of churns out the same thing over and over again, and you could have a career that way, but I mean, I'd venture to guess you'd have more fun and maybe even a better career if you're continually finding ways to innovate your own process or your own way of working so that not only it keeps you interesting for you, but it makes you more viable as a filmmaker. It's not like you're going to be restricted to just being, oh, you're just going to be the, Bloodsuckers Grimoire guy. It's like, no, I want to be, Brian Klewin, like filmmaker, and I think
Yeah.
that's the difference is being known for a thing versus being known as what you create. And when you think about what you're working on next, I mean, is there anything you're able to share about what you're working on or things you have in the pipeline that you're excited about or just things you want to plug, say, hey, these people are making great work. Love to give them a shout.
Um, well, I guess I wouldn't really want to get into too many of the details on the stuff that I've been writing just because we're actively, taking it out and pitching it right now.
That's fair.
Um, but it's there's some exciting stuff. There is a movie out, one of the movies that I'm currently outlining, the one that's not being actively pitched, is a movie called Pig Vomit,
Mhm.
and it's another movie that's like a action, fantasy, horror thing. A guy gets wrapped up. He's a food blogger or food influencer, and he takes a job at a small town because he needs the money. So he goes to write up and do a video essay on this restaurant in this rural small town. And when he gets there, um, this giant comet flies overhead and it drops these spores, and half of the population starts to turn into these murderous, cannibalistic pigs that start eating people. And um,
Hell
his
yeah.
that's
Sounds
probably
awesome.
all you need, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just say I'm in. I'm sold.
Yeah, hell yeah. That movie's got some cool twists, cool turns, and it just kind of keeps stacking. Once you think you know what's happening, you're like, oh shit, it just keeps going. So I'm very excited about that one. Another one that like the anime stuff is deeply embedded in there. Some Attack on Titan stuff comes into it and some cool stuff like that. So very excited about that one. Almost done with the outline, so then I'll move into the script. I guess that's going back to the process. Now I never just start writing. I outline everything before I ever start writing it. So
Amazing.
And
Well,
then I
that
want
sounds
to
great.
plug I want to plug my favorite toy company, Mezco Toys, too.
Yes.
This is Doc Nocturnal. I just am obsessed with collecting these things. So uh, they're like actual art pieces, but they always bring me great joy, and they're not like something you're buying every single day because of the price point on these things, but when you get one, you're just it's the greatest toys that have ever been made. And I love toys. I don't know if you can see all this stuff. I got quite a toy collection, but
I
you
love
know,
Maine. I love Mezco stuff, and I do agree with you. I think there's a trajectory I think you go through as a collector where you kind of like start with like what's available to you and kind of low cost is obviously more of a draw. But I think as you get more into this world of like what's out there, you discover the Mezcos, the sideshows, the forget the name of the one that just did a pumpkin head one. But there's all these companies that are doing great sculpts. You go from like, your McFarlane toys to your NECAs and then your NECAs to your Mezcos. And there is some really cool stuff. And a lot of the properties they're getting now, it feels like there's a renaissance of sorts of like toys and collectibles. So I'm right there with you. I wish I had more space. My wife will
yeah,
my
that's the
wife will
thing.
kill me if I annex the next room.
That's it, right? As collectors, we're now that's the thing that once you get to a certain point, you're like, okay, it's not even about the money, it's about the space and what
Only so
can you
many cabinets and walls you can put stuff on. Like it's just,
it's also really heartbreaking to put things in like Rubbermaid tubs, you know?
yeah.
It's like, I want everything on display, but I already have one here that's just a bin full of toys that I can't put on display. But
One day,
someday,
we're all working
someday,
for that one day where we have
yeah,
that massive room that
the
has
museum
limitless
room.
space. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's got
yeah.
limited space, all the best display cases. And I hope that a fraction of us are able to experience that at some point in our lives because there is something so profoundly cool about some of the stuff that's out there for fans of, whether it's anime, sci-fi, fantasy, horror. Like there's just so much great stuff out there that allows us to regress a little bit to the things we couldn't maybe either afford or didn't have access to when we were kids. And now it's like, oh, I'm an adult with my adult money. I'm going to go do these things. And I
Well,
want people to see that.
I'll plug one more thing then. We're we're actively making, I won't call them action figures, I'll call them toys for Bloodsuckers and the Grimoire. They came out of a uh, like a Japanese blind box gashapin idea. They're essentially like this, where they're like stickers on almost like a game piece, but they kind of have this 3D element to them. So we're doing that with the main character and the vampire lord. And then they'll come with they have little pieces that can peg in to the hands. Like the one will be able to hold the grimoire book and a couple other pieces. And they'll come with a little backdrop. So those are actively being made. The artwork has been approved. We're just finalizing the 3D models before they go to print, and then we'll be able to take pre-orders on those and see if anyone's interested in having some Bloodsuckers in the Grimoire merchandise.
And that's just cool to have. Just to have the artifact of that of your film, because I think there's so many of those movie tie-ins, things that we don't get as much of anymore. These kind of cool things that are made just for this film. So that's such a rad idea. And again, happy to give it some coverage when you guys are ready to start taking some orders to see,
Yeah,
who's interested in it. Certainly sign
I'll,
me up first for some.
heck yeah. I'll make a little commercial too, like an old school toy commercial for that too.
Like the ones you'd see on Saturday morning where it's like kids playing and it's like, the ideal backyard where they're playing in this perfect area that has all of the dirt and gravel where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, the little blocks that they crash through. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I gotta have all
exactly.
that. Yep.
Well, Brian, this has been an amazing conversation. I probably could talk to you for hours about just all kinds of things, but I want to remind folks that are watching this that you can check out Bloodsuckers and the Grimoire on Screambox on the 21st. There's also going to be ability to rent or buy it on different services like Amazon. So we'll include links to that in our show notes and in our article.